from Ipso, so I'll give a second to him for that.
Yeah, so just a couple things real quick. One, so first off, today after seminar, for our post-seminar hangout, we're going to do an international student spotlight featuring one of our students, Ana Gonzalez, and she's going to talk about her experiences in Peru. And then another thing, just to kind of make you aware, so this upcoming, at the end of March, we're going to be holding a special Ipso election to elect next year's president. So if you are interested in running for Ipso president, start thinking about that now. We will have more details forthcoming. You're also welcome to start attending the Ipso planning meetings we have on Friday to kind of get a feel for things and see if that's something you're interested in. But just want to put that on your radar and have you be aware that that's something that's coming up and have you start thinking about. And anyway, that's it for today. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Maku. I encourage you, if you can stay, excuse me, can stay for the after party, you are more than welcome to, and we really appreciate Maku and Ipso for organizing that for us. The only other announcement I have, remember, we're just passing here or getting close to the halfway mark of the semester, so make sure that you're staying on top of the other seminar assignments, looking for a defense to attend, looking for a student to talk to about their project. And if I can help out in any way with that, just let me know what I can do to help you out. If there's nothing else from anyone to bring up, we will turn the rest of the time over to our speaker today, Spencer Greenhalgh. Grateful for his willingness to come and spend some time with us. I'll just turn the remainder of the time over to him and let him share with you a little about his background, and he's got an exciting topic, I think, for us to learn from today. So if you'll join me in welcoming Spencer to our seminar. Spencer, we'll turn the balance of the time over to you.
All right. I'm going to turn some balance back at the end so that we can have some questions and discussion and everything, but I'm really happy to be here, really excited to talk to everybody. And I will share with you my slides. That's the Okay, that's the right one, I think. Are my slides visible? Okay, I know everyone asks that. I try not to ask that during Zoom presentations, but I don't see the reassuring glowy green lines around the window this time, so I had to make sure. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Spencer Greenhalgh. I am an assistant professor of information communication technology in the School of Information Science at the University of Kentucky. I'm really glad to be here today talking to you. I have had the chance to meet some of you and run into a lot of you at AECT and other EdTech events, and I'm grateful for the chance to talk to everybody right now. I should probably explain what the heck I mean by my title. I'm a French teacher, not a data scientist. It's not really an intuitive title. That's intentionally so. And it is also, I have to admit, a Star Trek reference. So Dr. McCoy in the original Star Trek series was fond of saying, I'm a doctor, not an X. And this is my take on that. I am a French teacher. I'm not a data scientist. But this is more than a Star Trek reference. I want to talk about why I identify that way and what I think it has to tell us about educational technology broadly. Let me do a little bit more rearranging. Okay. So when I'm introducing myself, I often like to joke that my career has been like a game of dominoes. With every step, I match like to like, but I wind up somewhere slightly different. So, for example, 10 years ago, this very semester, I was a recently declared French teaching major with a brand new job teaching French 102 in the Jesse Knight building there on BYU campus. So that was one domino. Shortly after graduating from BYU, though, I lined up the education part of French teaching to the matching part of a PhD program in educational psychology and technology, educational psychology and educational technology at Michigan State University. And a year or two into my time at Michigan State, and almost by accident, I discovered something really interesting. As a certain Royce Kimmons and his co-author George Veletsanos will describe it a few years later, the data generated by contemporary internet platforms and made available to researchers through various means are unprecedented. This was really exciting for me. This is a major part of my research. And I'll be honest, if you all didn't have Dr. Kimmons right there in the department who knows about this stuff better than I do, this is probably the sort of thing that I would be talking about. I think it's super interesting. I think there's so much data for educational technology researchers to find out in the wild on the internet for us to work with. But you have other experts there. So this isn't going to be the main focus of my talk, but it is a main focus of my research. I started focusing on this when I started to make these discoveries during my graduate studies. And it ends up culminating in a dissertation focused on teachers' use of Twitter that considers 1.3 million posts and the related metadata. This isn't really as impressive as it sounds, because I'll find out after a few months after graduation that there's a chunk of that data that's untrustworthy because of the way it's collected. But that gets fixed in the eventual journal article. And anyway, the Information Communication Technology program at the University of Kentucky is looking for someone who does ed tech research. And working with large social media data sets helps me line up the technology in my diploma with the technology in their program name. So one more dominoes match later, I'm an assistant professor in the School of Information Science at UK, and this is where I've been since September 2018. I wish I could have found a little bit better picture for this building that I work in, but to be honest, because of COVID, I've been here so rarely over the past few months that my memories of the place are probably about as fuzzy as the photo is. So that gives you a little bit of my background, but you may be thinking that that background actually makes the title of my talk even more confusing. Not a data scientist, are you sure? To be clear, data scientist is a profession with contested boundaries. So even if I thought of myself as one, there are other data scientists who might disagree with my qualifications. But I think I have enough going for me that it's natural to assume that data science is a field that I identify with, that it's the kind of work that I do. So for example, I've already told you I work with fairly large social media data sets. I use the statistical software R, which is prized by data scientists for a lot of my data collection and some of my data analysis. I have supervised a data science independent study while here at UK. I volunteered to teach my department's data science courses at UK. I have some of the skill sets for this. I regularly write and research with people who do consider themselves data scientists, including an author of the relatively new book, Data Science in Education Using R. So these all sound like data science-y things. I work with digital data. I believe people should be collecting it. I use data science software and I use data science methods. This all sounds data science-y. And besides, a French teacher? Really? That seems like an even more absurd assertion to make. My secondary school license expired in 2016. I haven't formally taught French at any level since 2016, and I'm not likely to ever formally teach French again, given that I work in a school of information science. So, on the face of it, asserting that I am not a data scientist might be surprising, and arguing that I'm a French teacher instead is absurd. What could I possibly mean by such a crazy title? Let's start with some definitions work. I do some things that feel data science-y, but it might be more helpful to discuss what data science is. The funny thing about the term, though, is that while it has a specific meaning to it, it's made up of two terms that are themselves more broad. And in their wonderful book, Data Feminism, Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein note that data isn't just numbers. It's words, stories, colors, sounds, anything that's systematically collected, organized, and analyzed. Similarly, they note that the science part simply implies a commitment to systematic methods of observation and experiment. So this raises an interesting question. Does that mean all research is data science? Unstructured assembly of anecdotes and stories, that doesn't really fit what these two authors are talking about. But if you are doing things in a structured way, in a rigorous way, they would probably describe that as data science. And they are intentional about having a capacious, inclusive definition of what data science is. They consider themselves data scientists, and they certainly have the qualifications to do so, regardless of the definition that you use. They'd probably consider me a data scientist, even though I'm not nearly as qualified as they are to claim that title. And they'd probably consider everybody on this call to be a data scientist in some way. So if they would consider me a data scientist, why don't I? As much as I loved Ignacio and Klein's take on data science, it's simply not the definition that's widely used. And it's certainly not the connotation that comes to my mind, or most people's minds, I would argue, when we think about data science. So let's look at a different definition. In particular, let's look at a definition of data science in education that was offered by my good friend Josh Rosenberg and some of his colleagues based on their reading of other established definitions of data science more broadly. So they take definitions of data science and then they adapt it to define data science in education. So according to Rosenberg et al., data science in education exists at the intersection of three phenomena: teaching, learning, and educational systems. Check for most of my research anyway. Computer science and programming. I told you I use R. I use programs to collect data instead of interviewing people to collect data. There's another check. Math and statistics. Okay. So here's one way that we could start to make this distinction. Not all of my work includes statistical analysis, and Rosenberg's definition rules that work out from being data science, even though Ignacio and Klein's notably does not. And in fact, in this chapter that I'm pulling this definition from, some of my papers with Josh are actually cited in the chapter as examples of data science in education work. And I certainly don't begrudge Josh for calling our collaborations data science, but it's not the word that I would use to describe my own research. And why is that? Well, we need to dig a little bit deeper. The question of statistics is a question of methods, and sometimes methods are where we stop when we make distinctions between different kinds of work in ed tech and other fields. A more fundamental question, though, and in my mind, a more important one, is the question of paradigms. So to draw on some familiar names again, Kimmins and Johnston define paradigms as the accepted understandings, methods, values, and expectations of people working within a discipline or a subdiscipline. And that idea of discipline or subdiscipline is especially important because in the world of ed tech, especially when ed tech is joined to ed psych, like in IP&T or in the EPET program I got my PhD in, these fields are kind of big tent, ed tech more so than ed psych, but when they're joined together, that makes it a big tent. If you look at education research more broadly, that's a bigger tent, and social science even more broadly is an even bigger tent. And what I mean by this is that there are several coexisting and often competing paradigms that exist in the areas that we work in. There are different assumptions about what makes good research, what the goals of research are. As Kimmins and Johnston say here, there are disagreements about people, about the social world, about morality, and even questions about what truth is, what validity is. There are some pretty big disagreements. At the risk of exaggerating things, I like this quip from Carolyn Ellis and colleagues. It sometimes feels like social scientists range from those who want social science to look like literature to those who want it to look like physics. That's a pretty broad spectrum right there. But this is where we come back to being a French teacher. To be a French teacher is a lot closer to literature than it is to physics. And as I've moved forward with my career, I've noticed that what attracted me to French language and culture as an undergrad has stayed with me even as I go through all of my different slides. What attracted me to French has stuck with me, even though I expected that I was leaving it behind when I went to grad school. So this has been a process. I haven't always felt like this, and when I was starting grad school, I think I would have been hostile to some of the ideas that inform my perspective now. I don't blame my past self for having a different perspective than I do. I wouldn't blame anyone else for raising an eyebrow at my current research paradigm. And I don't blame anyone who identifies more as a data scientist than a French teacher. We need both. But by going through my own paradigmatic journey, I hope that I can describe some of the reasons why I think it's important for me to remember my past as a French teacher, and why I think folks across the big tent field of educational technology research ought to be open to French teacher kinds of thinking. And this presentation is taking sort of an autoethnographic approach, where I'm describing my personal experience in order to comment on a broader phenomenon. I feel a little bit conflicted about taking this approach. First of all, I don't know that I'm professionally distinguished enough for my personal story to be of particular value in an IP&T seminar. And I'm actually not all that experienced with autoethnography. But there are a few things that have led me to try and take this stance, although although we won't be getting too deep into autoethnography here. So first, when Amy reached out to ask if I could speak, she noted that students appreciate hearing the journey of presenters. And so I'm hoping that sharing some personal details can be helpful to you. Second, on a more meta level, autoethnography is a way of doing research that's aligned with the research paradigm that I've been slowly embracing over the past 10 years. So this is a chance for me to put my money where my mouth is, so to speak. I'm trying to live up to some of the research perspectives that I've been adopting. And then finally, and most importantly, I have about 50 days to finish a draft of an autoethnography that I've been invited to write. When I was in graduate school, I got one sort of last hurrah chance at teaching French. And my boss at that time is now editing a book about how it's a book, a collection of autoethnographies from that experience. And so I have to write an autoethnography, and you seemed like a nice group of guinea pigs to test where my thinking is headed on this subject. But in admitting that I'm testing out some thinking on you, that means, not all of my ideas are fully formed right now. And so I'm looking forward to your questions and your comments to know where I can better communicate my ideas and also to figure out where I'm wrong about things. But in the spirit of autoethnography and personal experience, I want to take you back to winter semester in 2011. I am, at the time, a newly declared French teaching major. I have a new job as a French 102 instructor, and I'm headed into a meeting with my French 362 professor. And I need to learn how to work my own slides. Okay. So before I tell you about this specific meeting, though, the year leading up to the meeting is important. A year prior to this, so winter 2010, I'm taking a class from some guy named David Wiley. And even though the class is not really about instructional technology, Dr. Wiley can't help himself from talking about it. And I am so engrossed by the idea of ed tech that this idea gets written down in large letters on my mental whiteboard. And the following summer, an international relations internship that I complete convinces me that that's not the field for me. So ed tech gets double underlined on that mental whiteboard. And because I'm interested in the tech part and in the education part, I sign up for an introductory computer science class for the fall 2010 semester. I'm only intending to take it for fun and as possible prep for a career in ed tech, but I love it. And things click with me. Over the first few months of the semester, I am having a major crisis. Not in the sense that it was more than a minor crisis, though it really was stressful, but in the sense that I didn't know what I wanted to study anymore. It would be awesome to learn more of this technical stuff. It's really neat that after learning a little bit of Java, which is definitely not the code that's in the picture here, I can put together code for a few hours and then go, check this out, look what I can do. And in the field of ed tech, we talk a lot about the dangers of the oh shiny perspective on technology, but I don't know that yet. And when it comes to computer programming, I have a very bad case of the oh shinies. I am enamored by what I'm going to call the technical objectivity of programming. It's neatly structured. If you follow the rules, you usually get the same result every time. At the same time, though, switching to computer science is going to totally derail my graduation plans. And I've also been studying French for nearly a decade at this point. And I really, really don't want to let that go. So later in the semester, I compromised. I doubled down on the idea of doing grad school in ed tech, but so as not to derail my graduation plans, I decided I'm going to instead switch my major to French teaching. And this is where I find myself going into the meeting with my French 362 professor. French 362 is a French civilization class, and we're reading a book called 60 Million Frenchmen Can't Be Wrong. This book is written by two Canadians on the subject of French cultural beliefs and behavior. Dr. Springer knows that I've spent some time in France and Switzerland, and he asks me whether the cultural beliefs and behaviors that we've been reading about fit with my experience interacting with French and Swiss people. But to my surprise and embarrassment, I have a hard time answering him. He is asking me a question on the subject of cultural subjectivity. Different people in different places have different ways of relating to each other. And part of being a French major or a French teacher is being attentive to those differences and being attentive to those differences and then valuing those questions. But while I'm not blind to questions of culture, I'm not paying a lot of attention to them either. The semester before, I'd taken a literature class, but I was kind of dragged into it. It was a requirement for the major. What interests me about French is not necessarily the culture. It's not even necessarily the cheese, although I do love me a good French cheese. It's the fact that I can put together a few words for a few seconds and then go, check this out, look what I can say. I kind of have an oh shiny perspective on the French language. I am interested in French largely for a perceived technical objectivity. I see it as this technical phenomenon that can be manipulated to get certain outcomes. In my mind, there's a lot of overlap between how I am playing with the Java programming language in my CS class and the way that I'm using French in my French classes. Now, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. I don't want to sell myself too short here. In this same class, French 362, I'm reading another book called The Discovery of France, a Historical Geography. The book talks about how what we know as France today is really quite modern. It's cobbled together from different regions and cultures that, as I know from my own experience, these differences are evident if you're paying close attention. I love this about France. I love that the idea of France has less to do with generalized truth, right? There is this objective generalized reality of what France is. It has more to do with particular meaning, right? Particular to the place, particular to the time period, particular to even the city. Even if my default mode is technical objectivity, I still love the particular meaning that I find in the French language. I love the way that, the way that you say the number 99 is different in France than it is in Switzerland. I love how crazy and inefficient the number 99 is in France. I love how you can't pin France or French down, even if I still tend to see the language as a technical objective phenomenon. Even there though, I know deep down that France isn't objective. One afternoon, maybe the same semester that I'm reading these books and challenging my view of what French is, I am walking a few blocks away from the Provo Library and I run into a friend. I don't remember how it comes up, but I have a conversation with this friend about some of the subjective values that are embedded in the French language. I explained to her how French has a preference for the masculine. It defaults to masculine expressions. It wants you to use a masculine plural to describe a group of 99 women and 1 man. Deep down, I know that France is not objective and that it's not objective in ways that are problematic. But what can I do? I ask myself. I'm just a French teacher. I'm not even, well, am I a French teacher yet? I haven't even graduated. I'm a French TA. There's not much I can do to change the sexism of the French language. So I hope you're noticing some things here, but let's fast forward a couple of years. I'm now in East Lansing instead of Provo, and I'm in a PhD program for educational psychology and educational technology instead of a BA in French teaching. As I'm taking my first classes on research and quantitative methods, I am under the impression that as much as I loved the particular meaning of France and French and anything Francophone, I have set aside all of that in favor of a profession that favors generalized truth. And responsible education researchers know that there are limits to generalization and even limits to truth as it relates to EdPsych and EdTech. But in a lot of cases, it's what we're striving for. Rather than particular meanings, we're looking for these broad truths that we can then use to change the world. But there are a couple of things during these first 2 years of grad school that start to send me back to my French roots. The first is this reading, which I encounter in a seminar on educational technology. It is easy to overlook or take for granted cognitive technologies that we use to great advantage in everyday life. Consider, says Nickerson, for example, alphabetization. And this is a little bit mind-blowing to me. Language, a technology, the French language that I have just perhaps abandoned in favor of a career in technology, that's a technology too. And starting to think about technology in terms of French and French in terms of technology starts to blur those two worlds for me. What's true of the French language, in my experience, may be more true of the educational technology that I am studying than I had previously thought. The next year, I take a class that, that also throws me in for a loop. This is a class on literacies. And one of the readings that really stands out to me is this from Sylvia Scribner and Michael Cole. And they define, in sort of a roundabout way, literacy as the carrying out of a goal-directed sequence of activities using particular technologies and applying particular systems of knowledge. So to give you some background here, Scribner and Cole are trying to figure out the cognitive effects of literacy. They are in a tradition that is arguing about generalizable truth. Is it true? And if so, how is it true? Why is it true that becoming literate has a cognitive effect on people? They are doing work in West Africa. And I'm not going to tell you the story of the whole paper, but they come to the conclusion here that it's not as straightforward a relationship as people had been thinking up to that point. Rather, literacies are particular. The group that they are working with works with language in a particular way, and there are cognitive benefits that relate to that particular way. Other cultural groups that use language in different ways are going to see different connections to cognitive gains. Where this goes over the next several decades is a perspective that there is no such thing as a single literacy, reading and writing, and that it is inappropriate to talk about a single skill as having a single cognitive outcome. And in fact, the cognitive part sort of drops out from a lot of this research. Rather, within cultural and social groups, there are ways of communicating with one another that are meaningful and that are particular, that use particular technologies and particular systems of knowledge. An in-group has its own phrases, has its own acronyms, has its own ways of speaking that are going to be different than another group, okay? Acronyms are a good way of looking at this, or technical terms, okay? I am fluent in the English language. I am fluent in ed tech conversations, but you drop me in the middle of a group of astrophysicists and I'm not able to communicate anymore. So this is not only a shift from the generalizable to the particular, it is also a shift from the cognitive to the social. And this really begins to influence my work. By a year or so later, I am publishing my first paper, and you'll see my friend Josh Rosenberg right there, and we have a third co-author, and we have become interested in, well, I can't speak for Josh, but we've become interested in two things. First, that we can collect some of this data that's out there on the internet and we can use it for educational technology research to do new kinds of research that people aren't doing, a very data science sort of thing. We're using some very basic data science methods. But at least me, what I am interested in is the particular meaning. How are teachers enrolled in our Masters of Ed Tech program using Twitter? I don't know that I'll be able to find anything generalizable about this. What I do know is that there's something particular to this. It feels important to me, and there's something deeply meaningful about this. And it's sort of this tradition that exists in many parts of ed tech, of researchers saying, oh, you think Twitter is a waste of time? Let me show you how meaningful it is. You think video games are a waste of time? Let me show you how meaningful it is. We're participating in that tradition by saying, look at how these teachers enrolled in this master's program are using Twitter in these particular ways. And we cross our fingers and we hope that there are lessons to learn from this, but maybe the biggest lesson of all is that the particular is important and that we can't necessarily prove that on a generalized level, these teachers are better teachers because of their use of Twitter. but it is clear that they are participating in a meaningful community, that they are learning to operate in that community, and that there is a lot going on in this community that is worth documenting. So this becomes a big theme of my research. I'm using data science methods. I'm collecting this digital data, but I'm trying to get down to where the meaning is, trying to understand how particular groups work. About a year later, I published an article with this same sort of theme. Recently, as of the publication of this article, there had been a series of terrorist attacks in France. And teachers, I was trying to plug into the world of French teachers at the time, and I was following enough of them to realize that there was a lot of freaking out, which makes sense, right? This is a Friday evening. Something terrible has happened, right? The sort of French 9/11 experience has happened, and teachers have 2 days to put together what they're going to do on Monday when they need to go back into the classroom and talk to their students. This is not generalized, this is particular, but there's so much meaning packed into this. And trying to understand this particular phenomenon, it's very interesting to see the ways that teachers are coming to each other's help, that French-Canadian teachers are expressing solidarity with their linguistic cousins across the ocean. There's a lot of meaning going on here, and I feel like I am learning a lot from trying to understand that and trying to share with the world and invite the world to consider the meaning that is being shared, the communities that are being built around these technologies. By the time I get to UK, University of Kentucky, not the United Kingdom, I have to remind myself of that every once in a while, I'm not in a college of education anymore, and that gives me some freedom. So, without anyone to tell me that I have to stick to education research, because I'm now in a school of information science, I publish an article with some colleagues about how folks are using the LDSConf Twitter hashtag, which up until a couple of years ago was the semi-official Twitter hashtag for General Conference. And this was a lot of fun to see how identity and to see how religious practice was being enacted in this space through new things like GIFs, through memes, through pop culture jokes. This was not religion as it was practiced in Latter-day Saint chapels, but there was a clear connection between it. And as the particular and the meaningful, as the particular changed, meaning came with it, but new meaning was also added. And so some people felt flexibility to say things that they may not say in chapels, to express views that they might not, to crack jokes that may have gotten you in trouble in elders quorum, that sort of thing. And not always in a negative way either, right? I'm talking largely about using Minions memes, right? Or Eminem lyrics. I guess that one could get you in trouble. But so pop culture references and just seeing how the particularities made a change. There was continuity, but also change. So let's go back to this conversation I had near the Provo Library. By 2016, 2017, 2019, when I'm publishing all of these things, I am pretty clearly in the camp of particular meaning rather than generalizable truth. I still have to fight with journal article editors about it. My dissertation, which I told you about earlier, that was a real struggle to explain, no, I'm not trying to determine the effect of Twitter on these teachers. I'm trying to describe what they are doing and why it is important. So I've been won over there, but there is one other thing that is still lingering, and that is the difference between the technical objectivity and the cultural subjectivity. So you'll remember that conversation that I had with friends near the Provo Library was about the French language and its preference for the masculine over the feminine, and my not really knowing what to do with that. The French language was something beautiful. It was obviously being used for meaningful things. I did not know how to address its non-neutrality. Over the past couple of years, I've been thinking those same questions about technology, about Twitter, about the internet, about Canvas. How our values subjective values built into the educational technologies and the cultural technologies that I study? And what responsibility do I have as a researcher to call attention to those and to call for changes? To go back to this book on data feminism, D'Ignazio and Klein describe this as the potential of data to do good in the world. But for it to do so, we have to explicitly acknowledge power and privilege. We have to talk about justice and injustice and things like that. And that has started to change the way that I do my work. It's aspirational. I'm not particularly good at it yet, but I'm working on it. And I don't have much published in this area. But I'm interested in how far-right frog memes show up in Latter-day Saint Twitter, for example, and parts of Mormon Twitter. And what that says about religion, what that says about the alt-right, and what that tells us about technology. And I'm also interested in what teachers are doing in these spaces. So I'm currently collecting some evidence of teachers working in a group on a far-right website. And I've been studying teachers on social media for a long time, and mostly in an optimistic way. And when teachers are having conversations in a place where conspiracy theories are also happening, where people are calling for violence against the government, that's a new question for me to ask. And I'm not great at asking those questions yet, but I'm working hard to do so. And all of that comes back to 10 years ago as a French major, as a newly minted French teacher. So let's go back to paradigms. Why am I not a data scientist? A data science paradigm, and I put an asterisk there so that I don't misrepresent an entire field. I may oversimplify things here. Data scientists tend to look for generalized truth. They want something that applies across the board. They strive for technical objectivity. Bias isn't brought into it. Your feelings are left out of it, and everything is in the code. And then intervention is based on that generalized truth. If we know that this behavior in Canvas leads to higher grades, we're going to start promoting that kind of behavior in Canvas. Not a bad thing, not where I stand. Because I, at the end of the day, am a French teacher. I look for particular meaning. Meaning that may not be generalizable, but meaning that the world is better off for knowing and that we as researchers are better off for understanding. I also strive for cultural subjectivity, and not in the way that I am promoting French culture or American culture or Twitter culture as being superior to others, but understanding that technologies are not neutral. And it's important for me to understand that. And it's important for me to work for a place where technologies don't get in the way of justice, that technologies don't promote one culture over the other. And that is where my intervention is based on, trying to make the world a better place, trying to understand how technology sometimes gets in the way of that, whether it's in education or whether it's in culture. That is all the slides I have. Thank you very much. I am going to stop sharing my screen and bring the rest of you up, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
What do you do to ensure rigor as you are looking for particular meaning and acknowledging cultural subjectivity?
Thank you. I appreciate that. And this is a conversation that happens a lot in qualitative research, among qualitative researchers, and more especially in discussions between qualitative and quantitative researchers. And so let me give you an example from a project that I'm working on right now. There is a lot of talking. This is a very qualitative project. I don't think the qualitative-quantitative distinction is as helpful as it used to be. I think especially when it comes to social media and computational methods, that really starts to break down. But I'm working with, but for the sake of ease, I'm going to talk about qualitative versus quantitative. I'm in a heavily qualitative project right now where we are looking at tweets that have problematic material in them. We're coding them. We're trying to come to an understanding of this group and what they value and what that has to say. There's a lot of talking going on. We have a process. We make sure that we stick to the process. There are times when diverting from the process could potentially get us better information, but it's easy for that to become a subjective judgment call. So for example, we have screenshots of tweets. Sometimes images in the tweets are not always included in them. I often find myself, when I come on a particularly interesting tweet, I want to go out and I want to look it up and I want to get a better screenshot of it. And my co-author and I have to talk these things through, and we say, we have a system to ensure that readers can trust the research that we are doing. We need to stick to our system. We talk a lot. We make sure that we both agree with what we're doing, and that if I'm upset with someone that I am studying, or if I'm overly optimistic about something, it's not just my opinion, it's someone else who can verify that and make sure that things make sense for them. That's just a small thing. There's a lot of conversations about what rigor looks like. I think the starting point is to acknowledge that rigor looks different in slightly different situations, which can be a controversial statement. But I think having that conversation to begin with, that my rigor may not look like your rigor, is the place to start. And then demonstrating that you're following a system, and giving the readers and the reviewers enough of a sense of that system to trust that you're following a system and not just shooting from the hip. All right. Steve asked if I've received pushback from academics in my university. I have not. I'm interested in why you ask and what you're asking.
Well, I think that there's kind of a sense that if you don't, I mean, it's some along the lines of Emily's questions, but
yeah,
if you don't do science a certain way, it's not science.
Right.
And so I'm just curious, maybe not just academics at your university, but academics in general, saying, you know, are you trying to shake the boat? What are you doing with your research?
Right. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I am maybe not as radical as I made myself out to be here. I have pretty conservative instincts as when it comes to research, and I'm stretching in a direction where I'm more willing to push the boundaries of what research is and what it should be doing. So a lot of what I've been saying is aspirational, but that said, I've still run into problems. So I submitted my dissertation work to a high-ranking edtech journal, and the reviewers and I were just talking past each other. My work was descriptive, but it looked data science-y enough, right? It looked quantitative enough because I was doing a kind of quantitative description, but they expected me to have some sort of independent variable and dependent variable. And so it was just 3 miserable rounds of saying, no, I think I'm doing something important. And they're saying, but you're missing the most important part. I think research is just as much about making arguments as it is about discovery. We have to be able to articulate the value of what we discover. In that particular case, I lost out, right? I couldn't convince the reviewers that what I was doing was valuable. I tried really, really hard over 3 different rounds of revision. I ended up publishing with a different journal that was more accepting of the arguments that I was making. But yeah, so absolutely, I do get pushback, and I've gotten pushback from a lot of different papers with some different papers from people who expect edtech research to look a different way. So all I can do is make the argument the best that I can, and draw on the giants on whose shoulders I am standing, and try to use their arguments to bolster my own.
Thanks.
Charles has a question. Does the study of the particular push the active generalization to the consumer of the research? So not necessarily statistical generalization. Yeah, I think so. I think when we study the particular, then the reader has to make more decisions in my particular situation, right? In the reader's particular situation, are there enough similarities between what I've studied and what they are working in, where they are living, that they can learn lessons from that? And I don't mean to suggest that research on particular phenomena is not generalizable. This is another thing. If you read a lot of the qualitative literature, they make arguments for how it can be, but it's different in a different way. It's the telling of a dozen different stories, and then as the consumer, as the reader is going over them, then they are asking themselves, okay, what do these stories have in common? And more importantly, how do these stories relate to what I am trying to do? Okay, Spencer asks, how do you delineate between cultures or groups online? That's very, very difficult. There's a big chunk of my dissertation dedicated to that. I try not to define groups or to even define cultures per se. I like to use less, more ambiguous language like spaces. I am more comfortable talking about the people who interact within a social media space than I am lumping them all into one group. And one theme, speaking of generalization from the particular, one theme that goes throughout my research is that it's very hard to make general statements about, say, everyone that's using this Twitter hashtag, whether that's a religion Twitter hashtag, whether that's an education-related Twitter hashtag. It's very difficult to lump all those people in the same space, and so into the same group. And so I don't. I'm very careful. I try to be careful about not doing that. Rather, I like to say what practices are accepted or what practices characterize a space. And so it's sort of this intentional stepping back and saying, I'm not going to make a firm delineation between cultures or groups. Rather, I'm going to acknowledge that it's messy and ambiguous and tell you what characterizes the space and let people work from there. Okay, question, traditional quantitative gathering methods to perform qualitative research. Yeah, that's a lot what I'm doing. And that's part of why I find the quantitative-qualitative distinction to be unhelpful. I think making distinctions between paradigms is more important, and when you're working with digital data, making a distinction between human methods and computational methods is also really important. As to whether there are others who use those methods, yes, I've taken a lot of inspiration from the digital humanities. And from what I hear, there's a great digital humanities program at BYU. It was called CHUN when I was in school, which I don't think was quite as evocative as digital humanities is. But the idea that we can use some quantitative techniques to answer questions that are beloved in the humanities, and the humanities isn't generally, like, the humanities generally don't ask quantitative questions. But I've learned so much from them, not in the particular, but just in the philosophy, that we can mix and match these a little bit, and not, again, not in a reckless way, but we can ask qualitative questions with quantitative methods. Is it becoming more mainstream? I think it has a ways to go, but I mean, quantitative and qualitative approaches to research have been fighting for the last 50 years, and I think there's some progress made there, but the fight is still to be had, and so I expect this to fall into that in the same way. What's my stand with neutrality? Isaac asks, why have you chosen it? So I'll be honest, this is one thing that I'm still wrestling through. So is it the place where you find common ground to promote inclusion and diversity? Is neutrality where you ideally want your cultural work to end? I'm going to say something with the caveat that I'm uncomfortable saying it because it feels right up here, but like instinctively, I still get a little weird about it. Should research be political? Should research be neutral? And I'm less and less convinced that it should be, and more convinced that research should have justice and equity in mind. Those aren't my instincts, and so it's hard for me to move in that direction. But I feel more and more that trying to be neutral while an admirable goal can end up being problematic in ways that aren't expected. Now, the converse to that, of course, is that there are certain kinds of bias that we agree would be problematic in research, looking for results that back up your ideas and things like that. I'm still working out the kinks in that. It's really tangled, but that's the direction that I'm heading in. I'm sorry that that's not a better answer, but I'm thinking about it a lot.
We are out of time here, so we want to pause this great conversation and thank Spencer so much for his time with us this afternoon. Very insightful and enlightening. He's been very generous with us with the stories and insight that he shared. Thank you, Spencer, for being with us today. This will conclude our seminar for today. So we'll turn